boys, it's finally here, Season 1, Episode 1 of Boom or Bust, the show where you design subwoofer enclosures, I 3D print them, and we put them head to head to see whose design is the loudest. Now, seeing as this is the first episode, those of you who haven't watched my videos leading up to this won't have a clue what's going on, so we're going to talk through a little bit more in detail about everything that we're doing and the test that we're making in this episode, more so than in future episodes, because by then you'll already have an idea as to what's going on. I asked you guys, my audience, to design me some subwoofer enclosures on 3D CAD for a 12-inch subwoofer scaled down by a factor of 6 for a little 2-inch driver here. I am then going to 3D print them and place them in this test cabin volume which we've got here, which simulates a average car vehicle cabin, and we're going to run a bunch of frequencies on them and take an average and see whose design plays the best across a range of frequencies which would best simulate a good demo box for music and listening. Now your first question might be, hang on a minute, how does that work? Does this really scale properly? Well, yes, actually. Acoustics and enclosures and the way that sound flows through air is just fluid dynamics, and it scales absolutely perfectly. So a small box like this playing a higher frequency, when scaled up into a larger box, it'll play the exact same characteristics with the exact same response, just at a lower frequency. So for this test, all we've got to do is scale the frequencies, the volumes and the dimensions, the cabin here, and yeah, we're pretty much good to go. The only things that don't quite scale correctly are materials. As materials get smaller and bigger, their properties kind of change in a non-linear way. So it's actually quite difficult to find a small scaled version of what would otherwise be a kind of mid-range 12-inch subwoofer. But after hours of research, the driver that I've chosen here, I think will work perfectly for this test and will allow you to fine-tune an enclosure in this scaled format and then bring it up into a bigger size, and it will work just as well. The driver that we're using for these tests is a little 2-inch by Peerless. The TS parameters and specifications are all in the document linked below. It has a 0.8-inch voice coil, which will accept about 15 watts RMS clamped. It's got about 1.5mm of Xmax, which scales to about 8mm, and its XMEC or mechanical limits are quite considerably more than that. It has an FS of around 130 Hz, which when scaled up to a 12-inch sub will be about 21 Hz. So think about this woofer similar to a Hertz, a Morel, JL Audio, Focal, with about 500 to 600 watts RMS, nice soft suspension, low FS, so it work well in sealed or fourth order, with about 8mm of Xmax. So you don't want to be making your boxes really big, because this woofer will just unload and not sound like great. In order for there to be a 2-inch driver that exists that would scale to a decent 12-inch subwoofer, it would need to have a 0.5-inch coil that can take about 30 to 50 watts RMS, and generally drivers in this size are designed for full range, which obviously subwoofers aren't. So a perfectly scaled 2-inch driver would only maybe play up to around 800 Hertz mark, which would be fine because you could take a 0.5-inch voice coil, make it heavy with lots of copper, and it would be fine. But yeah, generally 2-inch drivers are designed for full range, so they're going to have much lighter voice coils than a scaled subwoofer would do in this size. The voice coil in this, being 0.8 inches, actually scales to about a 4.5-inch coil, which is why I say think of something similar to a Morel driver with a massive sort of 5-inch coil but a low power handling, kind of like an SQ driver. For testing your models head to head, we obviously have the scaled cabin volume here, which I have scaled down from a typical average vehicle cabin volume. So this right here is 19.68 litres, which when scaled up would equate to about 150 cubic foot of cabin volume. This has a standing wave resonance of about 180 Hertz, which scales to about 40-45 Hertz, and it has a Helmholtz resonance with the door open on this side at about 147 Hertz, which is kind of similar to 23-25 Hertz with one door open in the cabin, which is what you'd expect to see. So for this first episode, and to kind of set a benchmark, we're going to be testing a really simple aeroported box that I have thrown together for today. Its specs are 2.7 scaled cubic foot net after the aeroport displacement, and it's tuned to about 27 scaled Hertz, which is in reality it's 0.35 litres, and it has a tuning frequency of 164 Hertz. So to scale between this and a 12-inch version, you need to multiply the volume by 216, which is 6 cubed, as it's a volume, so it's cubic. And for tuning frequency, since that's one-dimensional, we only need to divide it by 6. So we take 164 divided by 6 gets us about 27. So let's get started and kick things off with an impedance sweep using DATS V2. Now, since this is a standard ported box, the impedance curve has 2 spikes with a valley in the middle. The box is applying the heaviest load to the cone and holding it dead still, transferring the most energy into air displacement from the port at this valley here. This is the box tuning frequency. If you want to learn exactly how ported boxes work and how they do this, I recommend watching my video where I explain it here really well. This lower impedance spike here signifies where the port stops working, and it's allowing the front and rear waves from the cone to wrap around and meet each other, therefore cancelling. The port stops working, the woofer doesn't really have any cone control at this point, there's no air spring inside the box, and it's very similar to free air. It gets closer to just being out of the box entirely. That's why you have this big impedance spike here, because the cone is moving very freely with no load applied to it. As we move up in frequency from this lower impedance spike, we get to this valley, which is the box tuning frequency, where the port is converting the maximum amount of energy from the cone into air displacement out of the port. And as we increase the frequency further, we get to another impedance spike. Now, between these 2 points, the port also gradually stops working, but instead of allowing the waves to wrap around and cancel, the port actually kind of disappears and almost closes off, turning the enclosure into more like a sealed box. This now sealed style volume has an air spring inside, which itself will have a frequency it loves to resonate at with the drivers. So that's why we get this second impedance spike here, because the air spring is now aiding the movement from the cone, and it becomes very easy then for the cone to move in and out freely, creating this peak in impedance. As we go up further still in frequency, this air spring now resonates outside of what the cone is playing, therefore the cone is now working against the air spring, not in phase with it, and therefore it's harder to move. So yeah, a very typical looking impedance curve from this standard ported box, and I'm sure some of your designs will have all kinds of wacky, crazy impedance curves that we can go into detail and analyze. Cool, that was interesting. Right, now let's shove an RTA mic in front of its face and see how this is colouring the input signal, if at all. So I literally downloaded REW for this series. I've never used it before, and so I'm not that experienced with it, and it's many features. However, this is the response SPL graph and phase graph from 16.6 centimeters away from the driver, which is 1 meter scaled. Not sure if that makes any difference in this case, but you see this is a sweep from 120 Hertz, which is 20 scaled Hertz, to 600 Hertz, which is 100 scaled Hertz. You can see that out in the open air like this, not in the vehicle cabin, we have 80 dBs here down at 120, that's 20 Hertz. By the time we get to box tuning frequencies, that should be up at the 164 mark, which is right about there. You can see, yeah, there's a bit of a bump there. It seems to actually have response down to sort of 140, then there's a dip between 150 and 160. But remember, this is pointed directly at the cone rather than at the port, so maybe that has something to do with it. I'm probably going to be kind of learning this along with you guys as we continue, but I thought it'd be interesting to RTA each box anyway, even though I don't necessarily know exactly what I'm looking at here. So above box tuning, 160, we go up to a nice peak at 200 Hertz. Then it remains relatively flat through 200 to 300 Hertz. Little bit of a dip at 350, but relatively flat-ish, getting a bit noisier as we go up to the 600 mark. But yeah, I'll let you interpret this however you like. Some of you are probably thinking, hey, put it in the test cabin and run REW again, but that's my hint towards how this box is going to perform in this test, and we'll want to wait till later to find that out. Okay, awesome. Now on to the fun part. Let's turn the amplifier on and crank up some bass demos with this and see how it sounds. Yeah, man, that was freaking awesome. So those tracks are actually played at 6 times speed, recorded in high frame rate, and then slowed down again in editing. So that's how this gives the impression of looking and sounding like a real full-size bass demo from a 12-inch sub, but while working with the scales and frequencies that we're actually testing with here. And to be honest, I'm actually really impressed with how it's kind of performing and scaling. Like, that's about the amount of kind of air movement you'd get out of the door open from like a single 12-inch. I mean, this is like the perfect cabin. No real vehicle cabin is kind of this solid and this sealed with no leaks. So, okay, so now the moment we've all been waiting for. What kind of numbers does this thing throw up on the meter? If I was to hazard a guess based on real world sizes, a single 12-inch 500-600 watts RMS, but getting that clamped, so a 1K amplifier in like a really strong stiff cabin, I'd imagine, given that this box is designed to play a bandwidth rather than a single frequency, we might get somewhere between 136 to 138 dBs across the board, especially on the lower frequencies near to where this is tuned to. Now, to measure the dBs, we're actually using an SPL lab sensor. What we're reading here is actual real dBs, not scaled, because we've scaled everything else about this project, so the actual measured pressure levels will be the same as if this was scaled up in real life. So if this does a 138 on the meter, if you scaled up this exact setup with this exact driver, it would also do around 138 dBs at the scale frequency. If I can manage to find a 2-inch driver that better resembles a scaled 12-inch sub, something that can accept 30 to 50 watts RMS, then that would be really cool, and we would definitely expect to see beyond 140, maybe like 142 dBs from this kind of setup. So let's slow time down and send it in the lanes. So as you should already know, the 4 scaled frequencies that we're going to test are 25 Hz, 33 Hz, 45 Hz, and 60 Hz. These 4 frequencies cover the normal range of bass frequencies you'd want your subwoofer to be good at playing at for a wide variety of music. 25 Hz is pretty low on the low end, and 60 Hz is kind of high on the high end for a lot of car subs to really play nicely, but this is really going to show up good box designs that can play basically whatever kind of music you throw at them. So we're going to start with 25 Hz, and this is closest to where my little ported box here is tuned tuned to. I was going for the bandwidth idea being that it will load the port on the lower frequency and then hopefully act more like a sealed box higher up, rather than tuning at like 33 or 35 and just basically unloading at 25. That'd bring my average down. And that's how we're scoring this, by the way. Those 4 frequencies, we're going to take an average of them. So multiply them together and divide by 4 to get one average score of all 4 frequencies. So no idea how this is going to go. Let's hit play on 25 Hertz, and I'm going to turn the volume up on this amplifier until one of 2 limits are reached. Either we reach 15 watts clamped to the voice coil of this speaker, which is shown by this little power meter here that I've installed, or if I deem that the woofer reaches mechanical excursion limit by means of a change in the audio tone. We also might see up on the oscilloscope here that it looks kind of, the waveform doesn't look so good, or might hear some backplating or something. But basically mechanical limit or 15 watts RMS clamped to the coil is our limit here. 25 Hertz, let's see what she's got. Okay, that was 15.7 watts on the screen, and what the what the whoa, 145 dBs? Okay, I've actually thought about it for a bit and I've got a perfect explanation for why this is. I'll explain this in a bit, but let's do the rest of the 3 tones and see if we can get anywhere close to that. That is ridiculous. Okay, so 33 scaled hertz now. I suspect we're not going to be as loud because that was pretty much bang on box tuning frequency there. So that's also the Helmholtz mode of this cabin here is about 142 hertz. So yeah, that 150 hertz with the 145 was a combination of box tuning, a bunch of power, and also Helmholtz mode of this enclosure. The kind of quarter waves or the standing wave resonance is 180, so that should help with our 33 scaled hertz a little bit, because that's 198, so it's close enough. Let's see how we do on 33. Okay, there's 15 watts and also pretty much mechanical excursion limit, a 138. So that is a huge difference. So with 45, I'm kind of expecting to reach mechanical limit first. We'll have a look and we'll see how it goes. Let's hit it and see what she's got. Okay, that was about 15 watts and yeah, 129. So to be honest, the driver, I think the FS is just a bit too low. It's like a 130, which is, like I say, about 21 scaled hertz, which is pretty low for trying to get loud in this environment. It would be nice SQ driver. It would actually do quite well in a sealed box or like a 4th order or something like that. But yeah, not very impressive, a 129. And lastly, 60 hertz. And I suspect this is probably going to be even quieter here. So let's hit the test and see what it does. Okay, there we go. There's 15 watts. So 127. So very similar. So yeah, it looks like it kind of levels off and flattens out outside of box tuning frequency. But then yeah, that 25 hertz was mad. I'm actually kind of curious. Let's play 20 scaled hertz as well and see what it does. Okay, there was actually just a little over 15 watts and a 133. So yeah, better still than the 45 and 60 hertz, even though technically I would have said that a 27 hertz tuned box would be kind of unloading by 20, but maybe not. You still do get some good output down there, and the port area isn't massive. It's not a massive port area. I went for bandwidth with this. It could just be the box is a little too big, or that driver just if you were to scale it up, just really doesn't want to play those higher frequencies really, especially in a low tuned box like this. So this will be probably quite a good opportunity for those of you who want to design a box for this to actually bring those higher frequencies up. I mean, this probably would work fantastically in something like a 6th order where you are applying a port load to the higher frequencies as well. It seems to really want to drive a port and is not that great at delivering decent displacement off the cone directly. It really does need that port. Okay, so now the cabin door has been sealed off. So this is sealed, not sealed on the dash because it doesn't stick to the dash, sealed on the passenger chair. So honestly, in this test, I'm kind of expecting to get similar results from 33 to 60 hertz as we did with the door open, but we're obviously not going to get that massive Helmholtz boost at 25 scaled hertz. So it should be more flat across the board here and more like what we would expect from a 500 600 watt RMS 12 on about 1K. So again, let's start with 25 scaled hertz and see what it does. Okay, that was 15.3 watts on my little watt meter down here, and we got a 132.2. That's probably about more what I expect to see from a sealed cabin on about 500 watts like this. Okay, cool. Let's do 33 scaled hertz. That was dead on 15 watts. We are pretty much at mechanical limit there. And look at that. The score is actually almost exactly the same as what it was when we had the door open. Alright, 45 scaled hertz. Let's hit it, see what it does. 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.4. That was a 126.3. Okay, cool. Very similar to, again, with the door open. And lastly, let's reset and do the 60 hertz. Let's go. 5, 7, 10, 11. There we go. 15 watts and a 123.8. That's actually a bit lower than it was with the door open still. Maybe there's some other kind of ringing or some other kind of mode that's built with that door open there on the 60 hertz specifically. Interesting. So let's talk about these results then. Why was my initial guess so far off, and why is it so much louder at 25 hertz here scaled than the rest of the frequencies? Well, there's a few things that I want to talk about. All the other frequencies that we've played are giving us dB readings between 127 to 135-ish dBs. The only one that stands out as being ridiculous is the 150 hertz or 25 scaled hertz, which actually just so happens to be almost exactly the Helmholtz resonance frequency of this cabin. And you can see here, when we have a look at how much displacement there is out of this open doorway with the toilet paper, at 25 scaled hertz, 150, it's moving a lot of air. This kind of scaled cabin is almost acting like a speaker enclosure itself, and it's almost as if you've got the toilet paper over the port. Whereas at the other frequencies, there is drastically less displacement out of that open doorway. Now, in a real world cabin, this is really a thing. The cabin Helmholtz frequency does add a pretty decent sizable boost at cabin resonant frequency. Depending on how many doors or windows you've got open, changes the Helmholtz mode of your cabin, and it can really help with these kind of competitions, especially proper droppers. The way you test is you have the microphone in the sealed side on the passenger's door, and then the driver will have the door open and change the amount that the door is open depending on what frequency is being played, and sometimes even 40 hertz, which is the upper frequency in PD, you have both doors open to raise the Helmholtz mode even further. But the thing is, real vehicle cabins aren't perfectly sealed. They're leaky. The metal panels flex quite a lot. You have vents in the back that release air to the environment, and also it's full of soft furnishing like carpets, and the seats are made of foam and stuff. What I've built here is like a very resonate-y Helmholtz box. It's like if you took a vehicle cabin and lined it with concrete or something like that, which is how people get crazy loud at one frequency. So I think I put too much effort in making this cabin be solid and leak-free, and as a result of that, instead of simulating a regular cabin, I'm actually simulating an extreme SPL vehicle cabin. But I think, unless you guys strongly disagree, I think we'll keep everything as it is for the first season, just so that it's got a level playing field. This is the benchmark that you're up against. Bear in mind that this cabin will give a massive boost to the low frequency, and you might think that will affect the averaging that I'm doing. Like if you build a box to play the higher frequencies better, it's not really going to show through as much as it should do, just due to that massive bump on the lows. But actually it will work out just fine, because you've got that boost on the lower stuff. If you design a box box that really takes advantage of that, and you're doing like a 150 at 25 Hz and then much low like a 125 at sort of 45 and 60 Hz, versus somebody that designs a much more wideband enclosure and is doing like 133s across the board, I think that the averages will actually level out and we'll still have a good competition on our hands. So I think that this test setup simulates a 500 to 600 watt RMS style woofer like I originally thought, but we've got a massive bump on the cabin Helmholtz mode just due to the fact that this is so freaking solid without any leaks. I think if you did take a 500 to 600 watt RMS 12-inch sub, 25 Hz tune box, and you had a concrete cabin that was Helmholtzing at 25, it would be really freaking loud with a massive bump like that. So the final results of my little benchmark air-reported box, let's recap. With the door open, we have a 145.3 dBs at 25 Hz, a 138.7 at 33, a 129.2 at 45, and a 127 at 60 Hz, giving us a final average score of 135.1 dBs. With the cabin door closed, sealed off, we have a 132.2 at 25, a 133.5 at 33, that's the cabin standing wave resonance doing its thing, a 126.3 at 45, and a 123.8 at 60, giving us an average of 128.95. So there's your scores to beat. And where does this place me on the leaderboard? Boom! First place, obviously, seeing as this is the first episode. That should be a nice easy benchmark for you to design something which will perform better. The way that the ranking is going to work is the top 5 designs will have boom status and anything below that will have bust status. And naturally, as designs come rolling in and start beating the previously boom status boxes, some of them will get downgraded into bust status. I've received loads of designs from you guys already, so thank you so much to everyone who has sent in designs. I'm looking through them, finalizing my print settings, and going to be cracking on with episode 2 pretty shortly after I finish editing this. So going forward with further episodes of this, naturally, rather than being a average vehicle cabin, this is more like an extreme class cabin. But the most important thing for any competition is that it's a level playing field, and this is going to be the same cabin for all tests going forward, so therefore we have a level playing field. So competition stands, and it remains that enclosures that perform well here in this test will also perform well in real life, albeit not quite as well unless you put them in a concrete lined cabin, but they will still perform well. And by that I mean well designed enclosures will perform great and poorly designed enclosures won't perform great, and the fact that this is an extreme cabin doesn't change that fact. If you have a design in mind and you want to get involved, then watch this video here which explains everything you need to know about designing and submitting something for Boom or Bust. If you run a business or company that offers products or services that you think my audience, audio heads, bass heads, would be interested in, and you want to sponsor one of these episodes either with a logo somewhere on the box, a sponsored message, or even a sponsored segment, then get in touch. There is an email address in the video description. So, I hope you enjoyed this first episode. Get designing, and I'll see you in episode 2. Hey, yo, listen to Le Lion Embrace. Sounds mad. Actually sounds like pretty sick.